Hello everyone and welcome to this webinar on the UK-Australia season. We're just waiting for a few more people to join, so we'll begin the webinar shortly. Hi everyone, we're just about to start. We're just going to give people one more minute to join in case they're still logging on. Hi everyone, and if you're just joining us, welcome to this webinar on the UK-Australia season. My name is Josephine Walsh. I'm the Communications and Marketing Manager for the season based at the Australian High Commission in the United Kingdom. I'm joining you today from London. I'm going to be hosting the webinar today and we're just waiting for a few more people to join. We've had over 140 registrants, so thank you so much for joining us. Whether you're coming to us from Australia, good afternoon, the UK, good morning, and anywhere else in between. The structure for today's webinar will be, firstly, we're going to introduce the season to you, and we're going to give you a bit more information on the theme, Who Are We Now?, before explaining why the season is taking place at this time. We're going to hear from the British Council, hear more about the concept of seasons and a little bit about the response to the call out in the UK. You're going to hear a little bit more about the eligibility criteria and how to apply if you're an Australian-based applicant. We also have 2 funding opportunities available, which you'll hear about in more detail. And finally, the last section of the webinar will be a Q&A so that you can ask our panelists some questions. The information presentation for the webinar will go for approximately 15 to 20 minutes, and then we've allocated about 40 minutes to answer questions. If you could ask your questions via the Q&A function, which is in WebEx, it's via a small chat that you can access. Please ask the questions via the Q&A rather than in the central chat. That would be great. We will do our best to answer as many questions that come through, but if we don't get to your question, please feel free to send us an email at the Cultural Inquiries london@dfat.gov.au email address. We are captioning the webinar, so if you would like to access live captions, you can do so by clicking the stream text link, which is now in the chat box. It's also available in the email that was sent to you following the link that was sent out. Thank you to Claire Hill, who is captioning the event for us today. I'd like to ask our panel members, Michael, Helen, Barbara and Alessandra, to introduce themselves. So Michael, if you'd like to take yourself off mute and introduce yourself.
Thanks, Josie. Hi, everybody. My name is Michael Napthali. I'm the Director of the Season of Culture, working with my colleagues at the Australian High Commission in London. Helen?
Hi everyone, my name's Helen Salmon. I'm the Director of the British Council in Australia, and I also hold the Creative Director role for the UK in Australia leg of the season.
I'm Alessandra Preto. I'm the Acting Head of Public Diplomacy at the Australian High Commission in London and working with Michael and the rest of the team on the season for next year. Thank you.
And hi, I'm Barbara Polinis. I work in public diplomacy at the Department of Foreign Affairs in Canberra. And I'll be working very closely with the team in London. Thank you.
Thank you to all of our wonderful panelists. And I also want to say thank you to Kate Murray and Georgina Innes, who are our moderators today. So Michael, I'd like to pass to you to give us an introduction of the season, talk a little bit more about the theme and why it's happening now.
Thanks, Josie. I'd like to start, if I may, with an acknowledgement of country, which is an opportunity that we undertake when we gather formally here in Australia. Helen and I, we're both coming to you today from Gadigal land, and Barbara is joining us today from Ngunnawal land. We pay our respects to the elders of Gadigal and Gadigal peoples, both past, present and emerging, and we'd also like to extend our respect to the elders of hundreds of language groups across the country. Thank you all for joining us today. This is a really exciting opportunity on behalf of all my colleagues at the Australian High Commission in London and also with DFAT in Canberra. And indeed our new friends at the British Council. We're so excited about the opportunity to be able to present the Season of Culture. Obviously the circumstances we're all familiar with and how much they've changed, but the aspirations that we collectively came together under the auspice of to wish to develop this idea haven't changed. In many ways, in fact, they're much stronger as a consequence of the challenges that COVID presents. The idea for a Season of Culture was one that was brought to Australia's attention by the British Council. They do this regularly, and it seemed such a perfect opportunity for us a year or so ago when we're thinking about this, and particularly now, to engage our cultural community in Australia to be part of this partnership. And that's the central component. It's about partnership and about exchange of ideas and about diversity. And what we're looking for is to celebrate the strength of that historic partnership between Australia and the UK, which we're all familiar with, certainly from a European perspective, but to look at it anew, to cast fresh eyes over it and to try and understand the value of cultural engagement and cultural exchange at this particular time. We want to get a better understanding of where we've come from, who we are now, and who we can be together as a people. We're certainly familiar with our past and the challenges that that's brought for our collective histories. But it's also a hopeful opportunity, and a hopeful one to consider what together we can achieve through cultural exchange and dialogue. It'll be a broad program. Obviously, art and culture sits at the very heart of it, but it'll be broader. It'll be civic society, it'll be through universities and higher education, but in particular, it'll be an opportunity to explore the diversity of our two cultures and the breadth of the elements that have gone to make up our current polity. That's celebration our multicultural background. I think that's a crucial component for Australia to want to explore. And so in light of geopolitical changes, which we're familiar with, whether that's Brexit, the consequences of that, and certainly the effect of the negotiations which are currently underway for a free trade agreement, we wanted to ensure that art and culture and the human component has its own natural voice as part of this program. So there's more to it, but essentially it's about a celebration of exchange, a celebration of partnership, and how we can move together as a shared people.
Thanks, Michael. I was wondering if you could tell people on the webinar a little bit more about the theme, Who Are We Now?
Certainly, Josie. The theme itself is it's probably the only didactic instruction that we're providing, in a sense, to participants. It's deliberately broad. It's deliberately open-ended. It's a big rhetoric question. When we ask of ourselves, who are we now? I think I was probably just speak for myself. It's a challenging question to find an immediate answer to, and that's the beauty of allowing our art and cultural specialists to come to forming ideas about what we are. So, in a sense, we came to this idea around the concept that though we know each other, that is, as between Australia and the UK, do we in fact know each other quite as well as we think we do? And I think many of us would, if we stop to think about it, maybe wonder what a new and imagined relationship between Australia and the UK actually will be, and what does it stand for moving into the future. So I think the sense of the season theme is a guide. It's a guide to participants to reflect on what that relationship has been in the past, but more crucially, as the question suggests, who are we now? And I think we're all going to be terribly excited to find out exactly what our arts and cultural and higher education communities have to say in response to that question.
Thanks, Michael. Helen, if I could pass to you to speak more about the British Council and to give a bit more information about the season and the response to the UK call out.
Absolutely, thank you, Josie. The British Council is the UK Cultural Relations Organisation. There isn't an equivalent of that here in Australia, but a Cultural Relations Organisation is essentially responsible for people-to-people relationships between the UK and other countries, and it is using things like culture and education to enable us to understand each other better mutually and to provide mutual opportunities. In Australia, we work primarily in higher education, in the arts, and also in enabling British qualifications for people who would like to travel and work and study in the UK. As Michael said, British Council have been running seasons around the world for well over a decade. To give you an example of the variety of seasons on offer, the China season reached 4 million people, as did the India season, all face-to-face. With, I think, India season had 50 million digital connections. And it ranges from something of that scale to Japan at the moment, who had a season completely fully formed that was to run between the Rugby World Cup and the Olympics, and under COVID has become a digital season with quite an extraordinary pivot, as has the UK-Italy season that's currently underway. So there are a lot of ways of coming at the season, and we'll have the opportunity to talk to you more about different medium and different ways of being involved. As Michael said, seasons are focused on what artists are talking about and academics are talking about at a particular point, and looking at questions around our shared colonial, present, and historical context, looking at climate, looking at human relationship to new technologies and AI, and where we sit now in the context of COVID and who we are as communities, and all of those things feed into the idea of who are we now. And those are all things that we have seen artists making work about now for quite some time, and we felt it was a great opportunity to give artists and academics that platform. Unlike a festival, for example, Sydney Festival, it's not a curated program. In the same way, the agenda is slightly different as Cultural Relations Organisation. So we are interested in what is the long-term impact for the sector and what is the legacy of the program. And those are around 3 areas: prosperity, which is a very simple, how does this contribute to COVID recovery for companies at this point at a really difficult time, and new market opportunities. Australia is the 3rd biggest market in the world for British work. and obviously the UK has been a key market for Australian artists for quite a long time. We also look at partnerships. How can we deepen and how can we further the number of partnerships between our two countries? And lastly, perceptions, and that comes back to the conversation about who we are now and having a much more nuanced understanding of each other. I'd just like to let you know that in the context of COVID recovery, it's obviously quite a difficult time to be launching a season, and we were delighted that we closed the call out last night with 209 applications from the UK sector, and which is thrilling considering that they've been absolutely decimated in the same way that the sector has here. So there are ways of working together that we can explore more, and we're really thrilled and buoyed by that level of commitment to this relationship by people who are dealing with a lot right now. And I would say from that point of view that although the call for funding has closed for the UK, we do have a number of UK companies who are still looking for presenting festivals and venues during the season dates. The part of the season that I'm responsible for runs in Australia from September 2021 through to March 2022. And the part that Michael is responsible for is in the UK from August 21 through to November 21. So do contact the British Council if you are interested in presenting work during the season in Australia.
Thank you, Helen. I'm now going to pass to Alessandra, who's going to give a little bit more information about Australian applicants, the eligibility criteria and how to apply. Thanks, Alessandra.
Thank you, Jose. Look, we're delighted to be seeking proposals across all art forms to apply for inclusion in the Australian program in the UK. Projects are not limited to touring works and can include residencies, a festival focus, workshops, site-specific work, digital work, exhibitions, and work for broadcast. Just to give you a little bit more detail about the eligibility criteria, proposals should clearly align with the season theme, Who Are We Now? All or part of the project should be delivered in the UK from the 1st of August to the 30th of November. And we're looking at projects that demonstrate excellence and innovation in the Australian cultural sector. And projects should also have established partners or a good sense of who the partners will be in the UK and sufficient resourcing in place to deliver them. So applications are open for inclusion to the Australian program in the UK are now open until the 5th of October. And there are 2 funding opportunities associated with the Australian program that applicants can apply to. However, it's not a requirement to apply for either of these funding opportunities. They are the UK Australia CESAR grant, that's the first opportunity, and then the DFAT Australian Cultural Diplomacy Grant Program. I will now hand you over to my colleagues Helen and Barbara to provide more details on these funding opportunities. Over to you, Helen.
Thank you. On the British Council website at the moment, you can find a link to the UK Australia season site. That is where you could register to participate in the season. The Australian work in the UK, as I said, the other side has closed last night. So you follow on the website, follow that stream, and there's 2 gates. The first is where you register your interest in being a part of the season and what the project is. Then the second level, you can apply for funding. This particular round of funding that is on our website has been very kindly donated by the Patrons Board of the UK Australia season, and we will be distributing those funds accordingly. Barbara has a second opportunity that is coming up through DFAT directly.
So the Australian Cultural Diplomacy Grants Program opened today, and that is available on the DFAT website. If you look under public diplomacy, follow the links through, you'll see the UK Australia season. So this is a special round of our Australian Cultural Diplomacy Grants program, and it is for funding for Australian applicants to participate in the season in the UK. Applications are available up to a maximum of 60,000 Australian dollars. Applications are made through the Smarty Grants portal, so you'll see the link to the form on the portal, and full details around the guidelines and the criteria and eligibility are on the DFAT website. We also have a link currently to the application form on the season's website as well. Thank you.
you all for that information. We're now going to start the Q&A section of the webinar. So if you are a participant and you do have a question that you'd like to ask the panel, if we could please ask you to submit those via the Q&A section on WebEx. If you could please keep the chat free, that would be great. We've got a few questions coming through, so I'm just going to start the ball rolling with our questions. So the first question is, do individual artists need to have confirmed presentation spaces? I have a confirmed solo exhibition that aligns with the season, but I would like to make new work to respond to the theme more broadly. So Alessandra, do you want to speak about how much detail needs to be confirmed at this stage, and also if new work can be presented?
Thank you for that question. Our expectation is for projects to have resources and partnerships in place. However, applicants, should get in contact if there are some new works that you are looking to develop. I don't know whether that the work that you refer to is for the space that you've already confirmed, or whether it's for a new space and you're looking for a venue for that new work. But do feel free to get in contact with us through the Cultural Inquiries inbox, and we can see how we might be able to nurture new relationships, and it will be on a case-by-case basis, and we'll do our best to see what we can do, but we may be limited at this point in time.
I guess the second part of that question, Alessandra, or to the panel more broadly, is new work acceptable? Is it okay to repurpose existing work? Would anyone like to speak to that?
Sorry, I forgot about that element of the question. Apologies. Yes, of course, new work is acceptable. It doesn't need to have been presented anywhere else prior to the season. In fact, it would be fantastic to be premiering work throughout our season. So, yes.
Thank you. This next question I'm going to ask Michael to respond to. Michael, can you talk a little bit more about how First Nations will be represented in the season?
Absolutely, Josie. As I set out at the start, this is an opportunity for us to explore the question of who are we now. And I think certainly when we were framing this idea, we very quickly, because it was self-evident, realised that the program itself, to stand up to scrutiny and to explore the full diversity of what contemporary Australian need looks like, will naturally enough need to engage deeply and profoundly with First Nations Australia. And we're doing that in several ways. There's a couple of very exciting initiatives which I'm working on, which regrettably I can't give you the full details of at the moment, but they're very significant signature First Nations works which we'll be bringing to the UK next year. But we would encourage all members of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community in Australia to engage with the program. We've been already talking to friends and colleagues at the Australia Council, certainly at Screen Australia, and with our various arts departments in Australia to make sure that the word gets out through various networks. We're not prescriptive, and it's not our place to be prescriptive about what those works should be. And I think by definition, the program doesn't seek to, as you could imagine, to direct what those responses might be. The history of Australia is in many ways a happy one. It's also a very challenged one. And I think that the breadth of what we're trying to express through a liberal democracy is a plurality of voices, Josie. I think it's important that we recognise and make it clear that we welcome all views, because that's what contemporary Australia represents, and that's certainly what me and my colleagues are looking to advance. So I appreciate the question, and we'd encourage certainly representatives and those who identify with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders Australians to respond to the call out and to speak to us and see how they wish to be participants in the season.
Michael, another question for Michael and Helen. Are existing partnerships eligible, particularly those that are on delay due to COVID?
Helen?
Yes, absolutely they are. There is also not a limitation in terms of whether a work has been performed before, although, if a work has been performed in the same town, that may not be as acceptable. But obviously in the breadth of the UK, if you've taken a piece of work before to Manchester, there's nothing to stop you applying to work more widely across the UK. I should have also mentioned, actually, with regard to the grants that are on the British Council website, the UK Australia Patrons grants, that those are only available to organisations, and they are capped at $40,000 as opposed to the cultural diplomacy grants at $60,000.
Thank you. This is a slightly longer question. I'm a British artist facilitator based in Australia. I'm in the process of getting permanent residency. I'd really like to arrange a residency at a unique location in Central Australia to produce work about the land and starscapes for exhibition in the UK, alongside a side series of live talks and workshops. Am I eligible to apply? So I think there's a couple of questions in there about residency and eligibility. So Helen, maybe you're best to answer that.
So yeah, that's a very good, and it's worth clarifying. Generally, you do not have to be. I shouldn't speak on behalf of DFAT, but certainly for the grants that are on the Patrons Board, you do not have to be a citizen of the UK or a citizen of Australia. If you are living and working in the UK, you represent the arts in the UK, and you can apply. Having said that, if you are already a resident here, that's fantastic. As I said, the grant round has already closed for UK-led work in Australia, but there's nothing to stop you from applying to be part of the season more broadly, if you'd like to do that and you align with the criteria.
Barbara, would you like to add a note in terms of eligibility for the Australian Cultural Diplomacy grants?
I will. Thank you, Josie. So just again to point all potential applicants to the guidelines on the DFAT website. So with our cultural diplomacy grants, they are open to individuals and organisations. However, you do have to be an Australian citizen or a permanent resident of Australia and have an Australian business number or be registered for GST. So that is a slight difference there.
I have another question around grants. So someone has asked, what are the differences between the two grant opportunities and can you apply for both? So Helen and Barbara, would you like to take that question?
Helen first.
Okay, so again, I don't really want to speak on behalf of DFAT, but my understanding of it is that DFAT's, the cultural diplomacy grants, are a different amount, that's 60,000 as opposed to the 40,000. They are open to both individuals and organisations, whereas the Patrons Board grants are only available for organisations. And the citizenship issue.
Yep.
The criteria they're broadly the same? I should let Barbara. I'm sorry because I don't.
That's okay.
So I should let her
Helen.
the difference between the criteria.
I was just going to say, also going to the question of whether organisations can apply for both, with the distinction of individuals can apply for the DFAT one. Organisations can apply for both pools of funding, but your project will only be, if successful, your project will only be successful from one of the pools of funding. The criteria are slightly different. But basically answering to or responding to the theme of the season, who are we now?
And I should add, because it can be confusing to people, because we have a shared website on the British Council side, I should be really clear that the selection process for the Australian work going to the UK is still sitting with DFAT for both of those programs. British Council is not selecting the work that goes to the UK. That all sits within the DFAT Australian government team.
You both. I think if you do want to check the website on the British Council Australia page, there is a page for Australia-based applications, and we are updating that information now that the Australian Cultural Diplomacy grants are open. So you'll have clear information about how to apply for each of those grants. Sorry.
And Josie, I'll just add there that we have some tweaks to do tomorrow on our website and also for the link on the season's website, but it will all be fixed tomorrow.
Thank you. We have another question, which I think I can answer. Hi there. Can you confirm the date to apply to the season? As I believe it was due the 13th of September. We have extended the Australian application process. That is now the 5th of October, and we will be updating the website and all our communications accordingly. So the deadline is 2 p.m. Monday, the 5th of October, 2020. I have a question around funding. What is the total amount of funding available for grants through the British Council and DFAT? Does anyone want to volunteer to answer that one? I think.
So the British Council grants are closed for UK artists. They closed last night. They were capped at £25,000. The grants, the Patron UK Australia season grants for Australian artists to go to the UK that sit on our website, they are capped at $40,000. And the cultural diplomacy grants that Barbara has been speaking to are capped at $60,000.
Thank you. Will Australia in the UK timeframe move forward around COVID travel restrictions? So I might field that one to Barbara and to Michael in terms of the impact of COVID and the timeframe.
Oh, did you want to talk about the timeframe first, Michael? Sorry.
Well, I would say straight up that we've already adjusted our timeframe once already. It was originally scheduled to start the Australian season in June. We're now back to August, and that's an obvious response to the COVID situation. Now, plainly, the COVID pandemic is something for which none of us have a crystal ball and are capable of knowing with absolute precision what the effects will be. So the obvious and sensible thing to say to all applicants and people tuning in is that it's a watching brief from our perspective. If things have to change, then they will change. But it is important nonetheless to recognise the importance of maintaining exchange, and it'll be artists and human beings will continue to do it in one form or another, and that's our responsibility to find a way to do that. So what we'll be asking applicants to respond to when they submit for funding and indeed to participate in the season itself is to give us a sense of how their works can respond in a practical way in a delivery process. Naturally enough, we all wish and hope that physical delivery in the respective country, in Australia and the UK, will take place, but none of us know that with absolute precision. And I think it's important to telegraph to all of our friends in the arts community that when you're contemplating making an application, we would strongly urge you and ask you very directly to think about giving us some insights into how you would be able to deliver those works, and in a way that comprehends the challenges that COVID is presenting. And the obvious literal one is the challenges that we're all facing and moving around. We hope that we'll be able to travel next year, but none of us know. So embracing digital, online, virtual delivery has to be something, and we know that from feedback that we've been getting, certainly from our friends at the Australia Council and other agencies, this is an important component. So in terms of the timeframe, Josie, yes, we've shifted once. We certainly have no plans at this stage to move it again. We certainly don't wish that to be the case, but things have to obviously be, it's a sensible and prudent thing for it to be kept as a watching brief. But at the moment, we're moving forward to, oh, there you go. Your cat, Helen, on August to November.
Yep. And I'll just add there, thanks, Michael. So just to add, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade obviously monitors the situation with the COVID-19 pandemic very closely. All the information that we have to hand is immediately put up on the Smart Traveller website, so www.smarttraveller.gov.au, and all successful participants will be kept up to date on advice from both governments, both the UK and Australian governments, as things come to hand. But again, as well, they're also on Smart Traveller straight away as well. We're hoping that the season can be a reset of our priorities for the economic and social recovery from the pandemic, and that's the aim.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Good follow-up question. If looking at a collaboration between UK and Australian artists, which will be delivered online as opposed to physically in the UK, is that relevant for these grant options?
The simple answer to that is yes. Absolutely. Yep.
Thank you. If successful in the register of interest phase, do British presenters examine the proposals, or do we need to establish any presenter relationships? So I think that question's around the assessment panel from the British side, but also around partnerships and collaborations. So Helen, do you want to speak to the first one?
Yeah, so we have an assessment panel of 6 who are assessing applications by UK companies to come and work in Australia. We don't get involved in the assessment of Australian companies going to the UK. That's all being managed by DFAT and their assessors. As far as partnerships are concerned, Michael should answer that from the Australian point of view, I think.
I think Alessandra is also positioned if she...
Yeah, AP, do you want to take that one?
Mute Alessandra. Thank you.
So we're talking about creating what, new partnerships, or
whether the applicant would need to establish any presenter relationships. So what amount of partnership is needed at this stage?
I mean, I think, as I said in the eligibility criteria, that it is far more compelling case if you do have a partner in place at the time of submitting your application to the season. So yes, I would say the preference would be to have a presenter in place. But as I said before, please get in touch if there are some open questions still for you on that front, and we'll see how we may be able to assist.
Thank you. Another question, what is the role of higher education in the season, and will there be forthcoming funding opportunities specifically for the higher education sector? Helen and Michael, would you like to respond to that?
Absolutely. We will have another round for the higher education sector. We're working on that at the moment with our partners who are peak bodies in that area. And that will be, we hope, in October. And we will have more to share closer to the date. However, I should say the British Council seasons are funded from British Council's arts budget. So you won't see the same level of support available financially in the higher education sector. And we're hoping that institutions will be able to focus on these specific themes and specific areas in collaboration, to work together to create a number of interesting opportunities. But there'll be a lot more available around higher education later on in the year. Now, we did take applications from under the arts banner from arts faculty in universities for arts projects, and also drama schools, art schools, etc. So again, I'll have to let the Australia House and DFAT team speak to their criteria in that respect.
I might just pick that up there. Thanks, Helen. Certainly, we would echo that the focus for us undeniably is arts and culture, but within that rubric, it's a very broad concept, and exploring education and public engagement is a hugely important component. So if there are interests from faculties or teaching staff to engage in ideas, feel no limitation, and I think we would love to encourage them, because one of the beauties of an opportunity like this, when we're exploring a game, which is the whole point of this question, who are we now, is to invite discussion and to invite exploration. And as much as it's important to have the artwork itself to kick off the conversation, this is a really important and valuable opportunity for legacy dividends about the deepening of relationships between Australia and the UK. And that's one of the really big attractions for DFAT to wanting to work with the British Council on this. This is about nurturing and cultivating long-term relationships, and many of those things can indeed be developed and promoted along through education, particularly higher education. So seminars, symposia, which could be executed online. We could bring together groups of people for discussions between Australia and the UK, which themselves may come off the back of a particular artwork. So, for example, this is just an example to make the point, we could have a visual artist that brings a work to the UK. What would be terrific is to find out how that work, which we would hope would respond itself to the season theme, what could a discussion in response to that work unpack? How can a discussion between academics and citizens in Australia and the UK explore what the contemporary relationship between Australia and the UK stands for? So, sorry, it's a long answer, but it serves to make the point that yes, absolutely, we welcome, Josie, entrees from our friends in academia. Thanks.
Josie, can I also just add to that? When I mentioned whether we had arts applicants, it's worth noting if there are people here from other sectors, the education call out will be much more broad than that. So we're interested in applications around science. The sorts of things that have been floated to us at the moment are looking at who we are in the context of technology, about climate change and climate science, about collaboration and epidemiology between the two countries. And it's celebrating all of the ways in which we work together and how we can further build partnerships in that sector that, again, all look at this, who are we now as two countries? So if you do come from another sector, please be aware that later on in this year, there'll be an opportunity there.
Thank you both. I have a question around the assessment panel. When will the assessment panel be announced, and how will we ensure diversity in terms of the assessment panel? So I might put that again to Michael and Helen, and potentially if Barbara wants to jump in.
Barbara?
Michael, if you can go first, and then I'll talk about the ACGGP.
Yeah. Well, I'm not in a position to speak to specifics, but I can certainly, as to names, but we will have an independent assessor panel, and that will be a process with which those in the arts sector in Australia would be familiar, and it will itself be diverse and representative of Australia. When we're in a position to announce who those members will be, they'll be publicly made available, but we're still working on that component at the moment.
On the Australia side, our panel's already been made publicly available. We've got Jenny Waldman, Hugh Stevens, Adelaide Bannerman, Ruth Fabi, Toby Karamatang, Claire Malcolm, and Kane Smith.
And for the DFAT Cultural Diplomacy grants, we are following the normal format that we follow for the Cultural Diplomacy grants, which is that we have a DFAT representative, and we will have a UK representative and one external person.
You both. I think you're a lot of questions coming through, so I'm going to do my best to funnel them all through to you. There are two similar questions around COVID planning, which I think we've already touched on here, but I will read out one of them. Can you give some advice on COVID planning? Our project in partnership with a UK organisation involves new work development and presentation by 2 Australian artists in the UK. Should we be looking to include budgeting for COVID-safe quarantine practices upon return, given that we can't be sure what will be happening in a year's time? Michael and Helen.
AP, do you mind if I ask you to have a stab at that? Because I think it's one of those ones where we're not in a position to give cast iron advice as to what the situation would be. So every application has to take account of how they regard their own circumstances. That's sort of the conversation that we've been having, hasn't it?
And I think perhaps in terms of specifics of this one, we might need to take it offline just to see if we can work through the matters there. But I mean, in terms of budgeting and, what it is that you need to plan for in relation to, I may say, COVID-proofing your project, you will need to be thinking about that in a holistic way. So yes, I would be considering that. But, this is I think we could say a quickly evolving process around COVID-19, or situation rather than a process, only if it was a process. So we, can't be certain what stage we're going to be at in the pandemic. So I think you need to be thinking about all the eventualities.
Both. Could works be proposed or presented at the Edinburgh Festival, considering the period starts in August and we hope it goes ahead in 2021? So can works be presented if they are potentially slightly outside of the season timeframe? Alessandra, I'm going to ask that one of you, if that's okay.
So works for inclusion in the program need to be within the season period time, so 1st of August to the 30th of November. But Edinburgh International Festival does fall within our season timeline. It was part of the reason why we included August in the scheduling for the season. So yes, works at the Edinburgh International Festival would be included in our season, and welcome.
I think this question I can answer. Will the season have its own website and marketing support? So there is a designated website which is being hosted very kindly by the British Council in Australia. That's where most of the information, or all of the information around the season sits. There's also a web page for the Australian Cultural Diplomacy Grants Program on the DFAT website. The season will have an extensive active marketing campaign in both countries. In the UK, we're looking to commission a PR agency to help achieve international, national and local coverage to promote the program whilst it's here in the UK. And it's the same on the Australia side with the work that the British Council are doing to promote the UK program in Australia. We also have a significant number of patrons, ambassadors and social and digital channels who will be helping us to amplify the campaign in both countries. So we've got 15 minutes left and I've got a few more questions coming through. I'm just having a quick look. Is the main objective activity in London, or is there a regional focus priority as well? This is possibly in the guidelines. So do Michael or Alessandro want to speak about the regional/city spread for the program?
I mean, it's really, really simple. Yes, right across the UK, and representation from Australia, right across Australia as well. Yeah.
Thank you. To clarify, an organisation can technically apply to both the British Council up to 40,000 and DFAT up to 60,000, but who decides which one you receive if they are both successful?
I can answer that one. The British side is closed now, so if you haven't applied for that, then that's no longer an option. But the UK-Australia season grants that are on our website, you are not allowed to apply in both directions for those grants. If you have applied in a partnership for money for UK work to come this direction, and you have a reciprocal organization, it has to be a separate organization that wants to apply for work going the other direction, you still have the opportunity to apply for the cultural diplomacy grants in Australia. But you can't double dip within the Patrons Board grants, and the same organization can't apply twice for Patrons Board grants either, if that makes sense. One go at the Patrons Board grants, essentially.
Josie, it's Barbara here. I was just thinking, was the question more also around if you apply for the cultural diplomacy grants and apply for the patrons funding as an Australian organisation?
Yes, I believe so. So my read of this question is, if an Australian organisation applies for both the patrons grant and the cultural diplomacy grant, who would decide which one you receive? I think the answer is that you can't receive both of them. You would only receive one. Is that correct?
That's right. That's right. And there will be a crossover on the assessment panels for both grant awards, and we will be talking closely together and working very closely with Michael as the program director. So we will actually decide which bucket the successful grant comes from, depending on, obviously, in competition with all the other requests and things like that.
Thank you. Barbara, I have another question for you. In terms of COVID-19 and the possible need for 14 days hotel isolation upon returning to Australia at a personal cost, do we need to factor these costs into our budget, or is that something that could be supported separately?
I think Michael had already answered that question previously. It was really around that we don't know what the COVID situation will be like in 12 months' time, and that basically government advice is ever changing, as is the pandemic. So I think Michael or Alessandra had actually said that really applicants need to take those considerations for the budget into their own consideration. We can't give any advice at this stage.
Thank you. I'm just going through to see if there's some themes coming through for our questions. Here's one. So will residencies be considered, or must you have work made already to apply? Michael, I might ask you that one from a programming perspective.
Residencies will be considered, absolutely. We see great value, and in fact, I know that residencies are an abiding and very successful component of what the British Council does, and we'd like to acknowledge that through support of the same in Australia. Residencies have long-term dividends for cultural exchange, and certainly about skills transference between sectors and communities. So if applicants have new and innovative ideas for residencies, and a residency we have to contemplate these days may in fact be a virtual residency, and we know that there are many institutions that are contemplating doing that. There are theatre companies, ballet companies that are doing precisely that at the moment. So we'd encourage people absolutely to think innovatively about ways that residencies can be explored. Of course, as I said at the start, we've said many times, we'd love these to be taking place in person, but we have to contemplate a reality in which that decision may, for so much else that we've been talking about today, that decision may be taken out of our hands, Josie. So we'd encourage people to think about residencies and in different ways of delivering and accessing them.
Thank you. Is the season interested in projects that demonstrate a reciprocal exchange with collaborators applying for UK to Australia? So I think this question is around, yeah, would you have to have a reciprocal exchange in both the UK and Australia? Is that something that we would be interested in? I think the short answer is yes. Would anyone else like to expand on that in a little more detail? Or
I think you're absolutely right.
I think it encapsulates what the season stands for in so many ways. So yeah, look at two-way partnerships and collaboration. That's a word that I wanted to make sure that I mentioned more than once, so I'll say it again. Collaboration is something that between our arts communities in Australia and the UK is such fertile ground for new and innovative ideas. So if there are exchanges that take place potentially in both countries, absolutely. But collaborations, more particularly between arts makers in Australia and the UK, are things that we'd be very attracted to seeing in the application process.
Great. This question has been directed specifically for Barbara, but it might also be applicable for participation in general. How do you weigh up individual versus organisations applications? What are you looking for from individuals, leading in their field, etc.?
I would really say that we're actually the assessment process is assessing the actual project rather than whether it's coming from an organisation or an individual. So again, it's about how the project speaks to the theme, what the outcomes are, how collaborative it is, the collaboration, and really addressing the criteria. So I don't think there's any one thing that sort of that differentiates it between an individual or organisation.
Thank you. Alessandra, did you have anything to add to that in terms of the eligibility criteria and what we're looking for overall?
I mean, that would be the same for the sort of general inclusion into the season, the Australian program, UK. I don't have much.
And I'd just add, Josie, on that point, we don't, by any stretch, have a prescribed number or amount of funding or the number or a target for individuals or organisations. We use those terms just to simply offer direction and to say that we welcome applications from individuals, and just as we welcome applications from an organisation. And an organisation is a broad concept in itself, and that can be an artist collective just as much as it can be an association or a corporation or a company. So long as, again, it sounds dreary, but it's important to keep stating it. So long as the applicant responds to the criteria that are set out, we welcome all new and innovative ideas. This is a fertile time. So yes, there's no prescribed amount of number of individuals or the number of organisations that we're looking for.
Thank you. I think I can answer this question. Can the arts works be exhibited in multiple regions and or venues in both Australian and UK within the seasons? I think we can say the short answer is yes. We'd be very interested in receiving your
Sure can.
Thank you. I have a question for Barbara. Can a cultural diplomacy grant be divided between a creative team in Australia and a team member based in the UK?
We would only be able to fund the Australian organisation or the Australian individual. And so if they are working with a partner in the UK, then that's for them to work out within their budget and how they sort that out.
Can you remind us, Barbara, what's the email address for if people have got specific questions around the cultural diplomacy grant? Is there a specific email that you can contact?
Yes, it's actually cultural.diplomacy@dfat.gov.au.
Great, thank you for that.
Thank you.
We've got 5 minutes left, so we've got a few more questions which we can squeeze through. I think I'll try and get to at least 2 more, but we'll see how we go. Is it advantageous if the new work to be part of the Australia and the UK season, for example, a cycle of short documentaries, is part of a larger Australian-UK project with base funding? I think that's a question around programming. Michael, Alessandra?
In terms of eligibility, I guess it's all or part of a project can be delivered during the season. So it would need to be, I think this is acceptable, I think it needs to be delivered between the 1st of August and the 30th of November, whatever part of that project that it is you are delivering in that period of time. And
yeah, Alessandra is quite right. We're happy to support a project that's part of a larger whole, and we recognise in the nature of cultural exchange, a component can be part of something larger, absolutely. But where our funding has been appropriated by the government for the purposes of the season, the dates of which are from August to November, it is important that the delivery of that component for which funding is sought is delivered in that time frame. That's a criteria.
Thank you. I've got time for one more question. Should applications include payment for artists and coordinators, etc.? Alessandra, one for you maybe in terms of what to include in the application around budget known to date.
Obviously, you need to fully scope your budget for delivery of your project. In terms of how funds are directed, certainly I believe for the UK season grant, we don't specify how you use those funds, but Barbara may have some different views in relation to the DFAT Cultural Diplomacy grant application process.
Oh, thanks, Alessandra. I was just going to say in the guidelines, there's a list of, I suppose, expenditure that we will support and won't support. And I know the National Association of the Visual Artists have guidelines on supporting artists and things like that.
Well, I think that's all the time that we have, but we will be following up with any unanswered questions that have been sent through via the Q&A. A reminder as well that we do welcome any questions to come through via the Cultural Diplomacy inbox for the season. The email address for that is culturalinquiries.london@dfat.gov.au. We will be putting this webinar online. That should be online in a few days on the British Council Australia website, so you can go back and watch it again. We do encourage you to have a look on the website and read through the FAQs documents, which provide more specific detail around the application process, which is now open until Monday, the 5th of October. I wanted to thank all of our panellists for joining us today, as well as Claire Hill for the wonderful captioning, our moderators Georgina and Kate, and thank you to all of our participants who joined us live for this webinar. So thank you all very much.
Thank you everybody for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.